Good evening, folks. You are very welcome to Bandido Talks, live here on YouTube, 7 p.m., episode 10, News on the Tube. We are back for our final live stream of the weekend. News on the Tube, every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We are live here on YouTube, 7 p.m., Saturday and Sunday in particular, we have a little segment that we call News on the Tube. We had a great show last night, really interesting show. We got through 3 very interesting stories, 3 very distinct stories, and I think we covered a lot of very interesting terrain, in the Bandido's humble opinion. And I have no doubt that tonight's show is going to be just as interesting, because News on the Tube, what do we do here? We go on to the Bandido's Google Chrome browser. We see what stories, what media articles are going to greet the Bandido. And what we do is, we get in underneath the surface of the headline, and we see what little golden nuggets are lying in, waiting within this particular news article that we will be analysing, and we try to extract the lessons that we can then apply to our own existence. We are going to do plenty of that tonight. We did plenty of it last night. There is no reason why lessons will not be learned this Sunday, the 2nd of November, here on Bandido Talks. Now, if you enjoy this little News on the Tube segment, if it's up your alleyway, then feel free to like the live stream, like the video in general. If you are joining us live here on YouTube, I would encourage you to get into the chat, interact with the show, let me know what you think on any of the stories that we are covering. Feel free to get active in there, and of course at the end of the show, what I will do is I will remember at the end of the show, when we finished going through all of our news stories, I will go into the live chat and address any comments or questions that may be hanging around there. So feel free to get into the live chat, interact with the show. It always makes the show more interesting. We had Lost Harry on last night. We had Bill Dollars. We had Quizzed. So I would encourage any of you folks, if we have some of the similar viewers to what we had last night, get active in the chat. Any new people who are in watching the show, let me know what you think. If you're seeing the live stream after it has been posted, get down into the comments section. Let me know what you thought about the show. And of course, if you think what we do here on Bandido Talks is useful, valuable, or interesting in some fashion, then feel free to subscribe to the channel. There will be lots of content coming your direction. We upload multiple times throughout the week. As I said in our little introduction, Friday, Saturday and Sunday, we are always live here on YouTube at 7 p.m. So there will always be 3 live streams, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. We will always have a upload on Tuesday. It could be a guest episode for a guest interview, or it could be a best bits compilation. So we'll always have plenty of content coming, and as well as that, we'll have little YouTube shorts throughout the week. So if you want to subscribe to the channel and find out what we're getting up to throughout the week, feel free to do that. Okay, with all of that out of the road, it's time to get into tonight's show. It's News on the Tube, episode 10. What are we going to do? Straight to the Bandido's Google Chrome browser. We are going to see what is going to greet us and the Bandido this evening. Of course, it's as much a surprise for the Bandido as it is for you folks watching and listening to the show. So let's see what is going to greet us this evening. Straight over to the phone. We're going to go right into the Google browser and see what it is that is going to greet us. So we have our first story. It is Sky News, and is it going to throw me up any cookies? Indeed it is. The cookies are always lingering. As soon as I go into these articles, I think, yes, I've gotten away without having to reject or accept something or subscribe to something. But oh no, Sky News wants me to take essential cookies only. Let's see if that works. Okay, that works. So let's get into our first story. Sky News is the media source. Let's see what we have in our hands. It reads as follows. 2 people in life-threatening condition after train mass stabbing, as police give details on suspects. 2 stabbing victims are still fighting for their lives as police question 2 men on suspicion of attempted murder after the train attack on Saturday night. Now there are reports that extra police will be deployed across the rail network. Let's read a little bit more here. So 2 men have been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a mass stabbing on a train left 2 people with life-threatening injuries. At least 9 more people were injured in the attack on a train from Doncaster to London King's Cross on Saturday night. Police made the arrests within 8 minutes of the 999 call being made, Superintendent John Lovelace from British Transport Police said. Okay, so I think that is enough for us to get a flavour of the kind of article that we have on our hands. So this was from Sunday the 2nd of November, so the article was released today, and it is referencing a stabbing that took place apparently last night on a train. And nobody has been killed yet, it appears. So the people who have been affected, they have life-threatening condition, essentially in hospital. They have a life-threatening condition in hospital. And apparently there have been 2 men arrested on suspicion of attempted murder following the stabbing last night. So, okay. Let's see what we can learn from this. So when I read an article like this, context is everything. So we need to make sure that we understand the context. Now, the attack happened at night. So let's see if we can actually figure out how late did this take place. So it says here, the first report came at 7:45 on a Saturday. And were there any other calls made? So it seems to be around 7:45. So we have this attack taking place around 7:45 in the evening. So it's not as if it's really late at night. Okay, 7:45. Fairly reasonable. And we seem to have this altercation, essentially, between passengers on a plane, or on a train, 2 people have been stabbed. They're in a critical condition, life-threatening condition, in hospital, and people have been arrested on suspicion. So, what can we learn here? Well, when I see an article like this, the first thing, as I've already said, context is everything. So, although we can read an article like this, and we can feel certain emotions that are bubbling to the surface in our being, we must remember, we don't actually know the context of this particular incident. What do I mean by that? That we don't actually know the context. Well, what I mean by that is the people who were stabbed and who are in a life-threatening condition. This is obviously a pretty serious moment in their existence. And I don't want to belittle what has happened to them. And we have suspicious people who have been arrested. They haven't been charged or convicted. So we don't really know a lot at the moment. But I'm going to throw out some possibilities just to get us thinking about this particular article in a certain way, and to see then if we can extract some sort of lesson from the article. So when we see this, or when we read something like this, I would argue that there's a natural bias whereby we tend to take the side of the people who have been attacked. So what do I mean by that? Well, when we read that 2 people have been stabbed and they are in a life-threatening condition in hospital, the first thing, and I think it's totally natural, it's a natural human response, I would argue, we think to ourselves, well, I hope they make it. I hope they pull through. I hope they do not die. I hope this incident literally doesn't take their life. So that's natural and that's normal, I would argue. We tend to side with the people who are in the most danger. And I think it would be fair to say the people who have been arrested on suspicion, they aren't in any physical danger at present. The people who have been stabbed, they are the people who are in great danger at present. Will they survive? Will they not? We do not know. So, what am I trying to get at here? Well, when we read an article like this, I would argue, we tend to side with the victim as it is being presented to us through the article. So right now, I think a whole bunch of people who would read this would automatically assume that these people who have been stabbed and who are in a life-threatening condition in hospital, they are victims. That would be the natural assumption to make. And this may be the case. These may have been two innocent people on a train, and they may have got essentially caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time, and unfortunately for them, they are now in a big pickle. They're fighting for their lives. That may have happened. However, what is the lesson in this story, folks? The lesson is, we do not have all of the context yet. And even though I would argue that our natural bias is to side with the people who are in the most danger, in the most peril at the moment, and those would be the people who are fighting for their lives in hospital, who have been stabbed, we would tend to hope that they pull through and survive. Even though that would be the natural response, if we were to analyse this as professional people, we would have to concede that we do not have, independent of what has happened, we do not have the full context and circumstances yet. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, for all we know, the people who are in a life-threatening condition may not be the victims. We have to leave that out there as a possibility. They may not be the victims of anything. They could have been the people who were provoking the situation, and by provoking and provoking and provoking, perhaps someone has lashed out and stabbed them. Now, did that actually happen? Am I saying that happened? I don't know what happened. But what I'm saying is, we have a bias. It's a little bit like, think of it this way, and it's not a direct analogy, but it's along similar lines to what I'm trying to get at. Think about whenever you watch a nature documentary. So think about that. A nature documentary. And let's imagine we are witnessing, I don't know, a cheetah chasing some sort of some sort of herbivorous creature. A gazelle, let's say. So let's imagine a cheetah is hunting and chasing a gazelle. I would argue that there's a natural bias in our psychology that wants the gazelle to escape. We don't want to see the gazelle get hunted down, the claws of the cheetah go into the cheetah gets the gazelle by the throat, slowly suffocates the gazelle loses its life. And then the cheetah, literally right in front of us, starts to eat the animal from the rear normally. I'm almost sure big cats do that. I think big cats always start at the rear. So then we would then see the cheetah literally kill the gazelle and start to eat it from the rear. Now, I would argue that our natural psychology, when we see this on a documentary, I think instinctively, maybe not everyone, but I would argue a large percentage of the population, when we watch something like this, our natural bias would be, I hope the gazelle can get away. Just a natural bias. However, when we analyse that situation as professionals, we would have to acknowledge that even though our natural bias may be we want to see the gazelle escape with its life. We must then understand that by the gazelle escaping with its life, the cheetah will go hungry. And so the cheetah may lose its life through starvation. So if we were to analyse that circumstance, cheetah chasing and hunting a gazelle, we would have to acknowledge, even though if there is a bias towards seeing the herbivorous creature, in this case the gazelle, escape with its life, we would have to acknowledge that by the gazelle escaping, the cheetah will go hungry. And for all we know, that cheetah could be running on empty. Perhaps that cheetah hasn't eaten in, who knows, 10 or 14 days. And as a result, for all we know, if that cheetah does not manage to secure that meal off camera, whenever we go on to the rest of the nature documentary, off camera, that cheetah may have expended so much energy, may be so hungry and depleted in terms of its energy reserves that it dies. So we need to be honest when we look at a situation like that. We may have a bias towards seeing the gazelle run free with its life. But when the gazelle survives, that hurts the cheetah. So I would apply a similar logic to this story. We have a stabbing on a train. Two people, their lives are in a critical condition. They haven't died, but their lives are in a critical condition. They're in the balance. Now, when we read an article like this, I think, just like the gazelle, it's tempting to think, well, they are victims. I hope they survive. It was wrong what happened to them. It shouldn't have happened. It is natural, I think, to come to that conclusion immediately when you read the article. And it may actually be the case. They may be innocent victims. That may be true. It may be true. But we need context. Just like with our example of the cheetah hunting a gazelle, we need to take in the whole context. We can't just have a biased, narrow vision of potential events. We have to acknowledge that if the gazelle runs free with its life, the cheetah has lost a meal and it has lost calories, and it is one step closer to starvation and death. So we must look at the whole context. In this case of our nature example, it's the same thing here. We must look at the whole context. We have to throw out as a possibility, even though these two people who have been stabbed, they are in a critical condition, they may have life-altering injuries as a result of this incident. We have to be professional and say that we do not know the full context, and therefore, because we do not have the full context, we must leave the door open to the possibility that perhaps there's more to this story that essentially meets the eye. It could be the case, as I said, that the people who are in this perilous situation in hospital fighting for their lives, for all we know, they may have been provoking on that train. They could have been provocative. Were they drunk? It's a Saturday night. Were the people who got stabbed, were they drunk? Were they shouting their mouths off? Did they confront the wrong person? Were they being aggressive? These are important questions that we must ask ourselves when we see an article like this. We have to be professional because we don't have all the details yet. The people who have been taken in on suspicion, they haven't been charged, they haven't been convicted. So it's early doors. It's too early in the entire investigation. And if we are, which we do here on Bandido Talks, we want to try and extract lessons from media articles. So this is a great example of where we've got this headline and it says in the headline, let me just check it again to make sure that I have it correct. 2 people in life-threatening condition after train mass stabbing, as police give details on suspects. So it leads, the article leads with this very emotional, we could say, emotional headline. Why do I say emotional? Because when we see something like two people in life-threatening condition, we can't help but conjure up an image of what that looks like. It generates a very visceral emotional response. And this comes back to what I'm saying earlier. I think when that emotional response gets conjured, I think a large percentage of the population, their natural bias will be, they are victims, we want them to survive, we hope justice is achieved for them. We hope that the perpetrators are brought to justice. And that may be the case. They may be innocent, in the wrong place at the wrong time, and there may be a heinous crime that has been committed. However, we must remember, just like with the gazelle and the cheetah, if the gazelle runs free, the cheetah starves. Even though we may want the gazelle to live, we have to analyse that situation professionally and understand that if the gazelle runs free, the cheetah is in as much of a tricky situation as the gazelle would be if the cheetah managed to catch up with it and get a grip of it. Same thing here. We have to leave the door open for the possibility that, even though these people are in a life-threatening condition in hospital, we don't know the context surrounding what has happened. And so the lesson would be, folks, when we read articles like this, there will always be a visceral emotional response to the headline. And that's fine. It's just the same as when, let's imagine you're trying to clean up your diet and eat healthier food. No matter how much of a great plan you have, when you smell the KFC or the McDonald's and you smell all that fried chicken dripping in oil and those chips, and they've been fried in oil too, and you can perhaps smell the spices that are coming off the crusty coating on the chicken that's just been fried in oil. When you get that smell, even though you may be trying to eat healthier and do your best on that front, there's no denying that when you smell all those high density calories, you want to eat the fried chicken. You will want to eat the fried chicken because your natural biology can detect the increased calorie density that's coming from the right. Whether that be KFC or McDonald's or some other fast food chain, you can smell the high density calories. You smell them and you want to consume that food. And even though you may override the emotion to go to KFC or McDonald's and purchase and consume that food, you still have the visceral reaction of wanting to consume that high calorie food. It's the same thing here, I would argue. You have that emotional, visceral response. You want to side naturally with the people who are in a perilous situation. However, we want to analyse this article with a professionalism. And therefore, to be professional, we have to analyse all possibilities, as I've already outlaid here. It's important to do that. Okay. So I think that's good for our article number 1. So that was, sometimes we get articles like this, articles which are quite serious. We're talking about life and death here, but there are still lessons to be learned from these articles for ourselves. So, with that being said, let's move on to our second news item. Let's see what we're going to be graded with. Okay, so let's have a look here. So this one is from the Belfast Telegraph. And let's see what it says. Am I going to be greeted with anything? This one is going to make me subscribe, I think. So I'm going to have to go out of that article because I need to subscribe. Oh well. So let's have a look now at this next one. This one is from the BBC. And I should be able to read this one just fine. So this one says the following. Teenager finishes 5 ultramarathons in 5 days. It says the following. A Jersey teenager has completed a fundraising challenge to run 5 ultramarathons in 5 days. Emily Patton, 14, ran 50,000 kilometres. No, sorry, 50 kilometres. 50,000 kilometres is the Bandido off his rocker. So Emily Patton, 14 years of age, ran 50 kilometres, which is 31 miles, each day to cover a total of 250 kilometres or 155.3 miles across the island. She did it to raise funds for the cancer charity ABC Jersey, which helps islanders affected by the disease. Emily has raised more than £2,200, and in a post of social media, the charity said it was, quote, blown away by her determination and heart. Okay, so quite a different article we now have on our hands. So the mood has been lifted. We have a teenager finishing 5 ultramarathons in 5 days. And just to reiterate what that actually means. An ultramarathon, according to the article, is essentially 50 kilometres or 31 miles. So that is what Emily did each day. So she covered 31 miles for 5 days, a total of 155.3 miles. So that is tremendous. An extraordinary physical achievement. And she's doing it to raise money for a cancer charity, ABC Jersey. And she's raised more than £2,200. And the social media charity, or the social media post by the charity, is very happy about this. They're blown away by her determination and her heart. Okay, so right from the outset, you may be thinking, where really is the lesson in this? Because it's very sort of factual and straightforward. So first things first, a remarkable achievement. I think we could all agree. 5 ultramarathons in 5 days to cover 155.3 miles, 250 kilometres in 5 days. It doesn't matter what speed you're going at. So it doesn't matter how slow or quick. To be on your feet for that length of time, to cover that distance. And again, we are of course coming into winter. Okay, so coming into winter, I think this was in, where did this take place? It took place in, where is the location? It doesn't seem to say the location, does it? I'm not sure where the location is. I'm assuming it's in the UK. Maybe I read that out, but I can't seem to find it. I think it was the UK. Let's assume it was the UK. So if this challenge, 5 ultramarathons in 5 days, was completed in the UK, we must remember we are now coming into winter in the UK. It is cold, it is wet, it's just not as pleasant as it would be in summertime or in springtime, we could say. So a remarkable achievement, a remarkable physical achievement. No question about that. Hats off to Emily. 14 years of age. Again, let's cast our memories back to when we were 14. Could the Bandido have done 5 ultramarathons in 5 days at 14 years of age? Absolutely not. I could not do half an ultramarathon in 1 day. I would be shattered. I could give it a go. But I would be in a lot of pain after 1 day. So to do 5 of these back to back is very impressive. We can agree on that. But to put our praise aside, because what Emily has done as a 14-year-old is tremendous. And I have no doubt that her motivation for doing this is, we could say, fairly pure, if we want to say that. You know, she's getting out. She's out in nature, we could say. She's out doing physical activity. How many of all the time that she was running, was she on her phone? Was she just focused on doing this important thing to her, which was raising money for this cancer charity? So really good, I think. No problem. No bone to pick there whatsoever. But there is a part of this article that I do want to hone in on. The part of it that we've read. And the part that I want to hone in on is this. Emily has raised more than £2,200. £2,200 for this cancer charity. Now, isn't this fascinating? We have a regular citizen. She's decided to do something remarkable. 5 ultramarathons in 5 days. 250 kilometers across 5 days. A remarkable achievement. And really, I think Emily should be very proud of what she's done. She will have, I would assume, if I were able to pull something like that off, I would have a tremendous amount of pride in what I've done. I feel like my self-esteem would be as high as it could be. I would feel a great sense of pride in my achievement. And I think Emily should feel proud of what she's done. When I read what I've just read, £2,200 for something of that magnitude, it brings me back to last night's episode, News on the Tube, our first story from last night's show. For those of you who've watched last night's show, you will know what that story was. It was about Billie Eilish, the singer, who donated $11.5 million from her world tour. She donated it to these organizations for climate stuff, climate change stuff. So, the thing that strikes me about this article, and I suppose we could perhaps say the lesson in the article, we have this magnificent achievement. All of this terrain that has been covered by Emily. And we look at what was raised. £2,200. And I'm not trying to undermine the achievement in the sense that I'm trying to poke a hole in what has happened here. I'm just making an observation. Emily does something remarkable at 14 years of age. And she raises £2,200. Now, I am sure the charity and the people who she has been working with are really happy with this. This is a great donation. I would have no reason to doubt that. But to my mind, the juxtaposition is striking. We have Billie Eilish, $11.5 million gets donated to a charity, and we have £2,200 donated to this charity. Now, do I think Billie Eilish, what Billie Eilish does, is it superior to what Emily has done? I would argue no. Do I think standing on a stage and singing into a microphone is superior to what Emily has done? No, I do not. And I'm not saying that Billie Eilish, what she does, is inferior to Emily. What I'm saying is, I don't think what Billie Eilish, the point I'm trying to make is what Billie Eilish does, I don't think it is superior in any way to Emily's accomplishment. Yet, when we look at the resources surrounding both of these people, the resources that surround Billie Eilish and the resources that surround Emily, there is such a shocking gap in resources that we have to, I think, reflect and again be professional in what it is that we're reading and seeing in these particular articles on our News on the Tube segment. There is a massive gap. Essentially, Emily is donating to charity. That is what she's doing. She's raising money. She could have kept the money, in theory, but she's raising money to donate it to a charity of her choice. Billie Eilish donated money last night. And we look at the sums of money involved. Now, whether or not you agree with me, somebody may think what Billie Eilish does warrants the extraordinary wealth that she has. Is being a singer and a pop star and an influencer worth hundreds of millions? Is it that valuable? Is it so valuable that Billie Eilish is worth hundreds of millions? And is Emily's achievement so inferior that she can only raise £2,200? Interesting questions. Interesting way to look at this particular story, I would argue. Because the gap is so striking. Why is Billie Eilish so much wealthier? Why is Billie Eilish able to accumulate so many more resources than, say, Emily? And why are the people who are donating to Emily only able to donate a grand total of £2,200? How could it be that common folk, when they pool all of their energy and resources together, we can get a grand total of £2,200 for Emily's achievement, yet Billie Eilish can just pick, oh yeah, I've got a spur $11.5 million in my pocket, and here we go, climate change organisations, do your thing with my donation. Now, of course, you will remember at the end of last night's show, Lost Harry, one of our commenters in the chat, asked a very interesting question, which is, are donations tax-free? We had a little discussion about that last night, and about how rich, wealthy people have access to rich and clever accountants and financial advisors, and that we could perhaps speculate that there may be, in light of things like the Panama Papers and these tax scandals with very rich, wealthy people, we could speculate that there may be a legal loophole in which rich people, wealthy people, can avoid tax on their donations. Especially donations of that size, 11.5 million. And I find it interesting, the gap in wealth. And this is the interesting thing. I think the lesson in this story is perhaps our way of looking at money and wealth and its distribution, and to get us to start thinking about why do some people, if you agree with me, let's say you agree with me, do you think what Billie Eilish does on a stage, singing, performing, now the reason why I'm saying that, I'm not, because her $11.5 million donation came from her tour, so she's on stage and singing, I think it's fair to say that. She's a songwriter. So she's at home. I think she has a brother who she collaborates with, and they write music. Great. I'm a musician. I enjoy music. So it's not me taking a pot shot at Billie Eilish or her creative team. But is what Billie Eilish does so superior to what someone like Emily has just done that it warrants such a difference in one's ability to donate money? So Emily is able to donate £2,200 for a marvellous achievement. 5 ultramarathons in 5 days. Was this good for the community? Did this rally people? Did people sort of feel like they were contributing to a common cause? They felt like they were helping Emily. They felt like they were helping Emily's charity. Perhaps Emily was running through some of their communities. There was community cohesion. It brought people together. I would say it's a very positive, good thing, we could argue. And Billie Eilish, she creates music. She makes art. She performs to people. She entertains them. Okay, we can look at that and say that's fine. No problem. However, one is able to donate 11.5 million. Just like that. 11.5 million. There you go. I'll just donate that. And here we have Emily, an enormous physical challenge. I don't think what Billie Eilish does, Bandido's humble opinion, I don't think what Billie Eilish does is unbelievably superior. Not in my opinion, especially when we bring in context. Emily, 14 years of age, an extraordinary physical achievement. Billie Eilish, what age is she? She's 22, 23. Fantastic. She's a very successful musician. Fantastic. But the gap in the size of the donation is what stands out to me. And so when I read a story like this, and I look at the effort and the input, and the appreciation that people have for what Emily has done, and whatever your thoughts are on cancer as a disease, and whether you think this is where money should go, whether you think that how cancer charities invest the money, whatever you think about all of that, it doesn't matter what Emily did. Perhaps Emily really believes in this, and the people around Emily really believe in it, and they think they're doing something really important, and that's fine. However, £2,200? It seems, when I would think of this, because this £2,200 didn't even come from one person. I think it's probably came, like most of these things, from a whole bunch of people have donated to Emily's fundraiser. So you've possibly got 50 or hundreds of people donating. And all of those people, let's say 100 people donated to this cause, to Emily's cause, while she was doing these 5 ultramarathons in 5 days. Let's imagine 100 people have donated. 100 people were able to generate a grand sum of £2,200. And yet we have Billie Eilish, a singer-songwriter who performs on stage, who is a multi-millionaire, hundreds of millions. Does that seem strange? That there's such a gap that exists? Does that seem strange? I think it's an interesting angle to look at the story, because that's what I think. Apart from the extraordinary achievement, I look at the amount of money that has been raised. And again, let me reiterate, I'm sure the charity is very happy. I'm sure Emily is very happy with how much money has been raised. I'm sure Emily's family and friends and all the people who donated and helped Emily and chivied her along throughout this grueling ultramarathon series of races, I'm sure they're all super pleased with the amount of money that has been raised. However, I think the question remains, and it's an interesting question for us to ponder. The gap that exists between what some people do, in this case Billie Eilish, and what other people do, like Emily, and the people who have contributed towards Emily's fundraiser. Because all of those people, I would say a hefty percentage, are working. They must earn an income, I would say. So they are working. And yet our grand total is £2,200. Interesting way to look at the article. But anyway, that's what I think the lesson is. I think the lesson is, we could say, when we look at donations, depending on who the donation is coming from, I think it tells us something interesting about the world. So when the donation comes from a pop star, it's just a small 11.5 million. When it comes from someone who's not a pop star, who's not famous in the conventional sense, and is just doing something interesting for a cause that they believe in, there's an enormous drop-off in the donation. Why? Would be an interesting question. How could there be such a gap? So I think that's the lesson here. The lesson is for us to look at something like this and just start asking some questions. Start to speculate. How could there be such a difference? Why does Billie Eilish earn so much money? Is it because she really is a tremendously talented singer, songwriter, performer? Does she get money through sponsorship? How is it that she has such an extraordinary amount of wealth doing something that I would argue is not grossly superior to what Emily has done or the people who have contributed to Emily's fundraiser? Anyway, that's our second story. So congratulations to Emily. A phenomenal achievement, I would say. 14 years of age. What was my biggest achievement at 14 years of age? I would say A physical achievement. What was the most impressive thing that I did physically at 14 years of age? Probably playing a GAA match for 70 minutes. Not particularly impressive compared to Emily. So hats off to Emily. Credit to her. Let us move on to our final story. So that's Emily. Teenager finishing 5 ultramarathons in 5 days. Very good indeed. Now, what time are we on? We'll squeeze in one more story, I think. Then we'll get to our live chats. See what's happening. So, our final story is from the New York Times. And sometimes you'll see me delay here a little bit because I'm waiting to see, do I have to subscribe? What do I have to reject or accept? I think we're in. Okay. So this is from the New York Times. And the heading or the headline is as follows. An outlier in Irish politics has become the country's president. Propelled by anti-establishment fervour, Catherine Connolly was elected last week with a landmark, popular mandate. Let's read a little more here. She has said Ireland's policy of neutrality is threatened, quote, by the warmongering military-industrial complex in much of Europe. She predicted that a, quote, united Ireland is inevitable. She declared that in war-torn Gaza, Israel's, quote, genocide was enabled and resourced by American money. It then says, such blunt, unfiltered comments have made Catherine Connolly something of an outlier in Irish politics. They also helped get her elected last week as the President of Ireland, winning the largest popular mandate of any candidate since the presidency. A largely ceremonial post was created in 1937. Okay, so we're back on to the Irish presidential election. We did cover this a little bit on one of our previous News on the Tube episodes, but we can maybe tackle this from a different angle. So, what the article is getting at is it's getting at Catherine Connolly being an outlier. And the evidence that the article gives for Catherine Connolly, the new Irish president, elected in 2025, the evidence that the article gives that she's an outlier is because she has said things like, Ireland's policy of neutrality is threatened by the warmongering military-industrial complex in much of Europe. She says that united Ireland is inevitable. She declared that in war-torn Gaza, Israel's genocide was enabled and resourced by American money. So she has made these comments. And according to the article, this makes her an outlier because I suppose the article's trying to say that she doesn't follow the standard political template. So normally, the article is perhaps trying to argue that these types of things don't typically get said by an Irish president. Normally, there's a different kind of rhetoric that comes from an Irish president. So Catherine Connolly, the article is arguing, is an outlier. Now, what else did it say? So, it claims that she's essentially got elected because of the stances that she has on issues like these. And what can we learn here? What can we learn from this New York Times article about Catherine Connolly? Well, when we're in the realm of politics, we've talked about this earlier this week in episode 8, The Art of the Porky Pie. It's a really good episode if you're interested in sort of learning a little bit more, or perhaps learning's the wrong word, or having a different perspective, we could say, on honesty, telling the truth, lying, manipulation, deception, all of these types of things. Episode 8, The Art of the Porky Pie, would be a good episode for you to dive into. It's about an hour long, and it's interesting. We go down through a whole bunch of stuff and try to figure out, is honesty always the best policy? Now, in politics, I make the case in that episode that words that people would associate with politicians, if we were to do a survey, general words, and not everybody would use these words, but I think a hefty percentage of this survey of people, words people would use to describe politicians would be deceptive, manipulative, who knows, they tell porky pies, they lie, they aren't honest. These would be words and phrases that would be used in many instances to describe politicians and politics in general. So when I read this article and the New York Post in this case, or the New York Times in this case, is making, essentially it's trying to paint Catherine Connolly as something different to what we've always seen. So Catherine Connolly is she's a different kind of individual who's involved in this role compared to anything that we've seen before, because of her stances on these various topics. Now, are these Catherine Connolly's true opinions? Let's assume they are. So let's assume they are. Could Catherine Connolly be telling us these are her opinions when they aren't really? It's a possibility. Again, just like our opening story about the stabbings on the train. Again, we have to be honest and say, is it unlikely? Perhaps. But it is possible that Catherine Connolly may not actually have these opinions. She may not honestly hold these opinions. She may be giving the perception that these are her opinions. Why would she do that? Well, perhaps one could make the argument that in 2025, and especially November 2025, it is now well known, and when I say well known, I mean it's well accepted, and in some cases it's actually welcomed to make these criticisms. So in 2025, November 2025, it is no longer out there. It's no longer out there to criticize genocides. It's no longer out there to criticize any of these things, any of these comments that Catherine Connolly has made. I've read them out a couple of times. In the modern age, 2025, November, I would make the case that it is quite common to hear these comments. I think it's quite common. I think there are a lot of people who it has become essentially acceptable to have this kind of rhetoric. So I don't think it's actually as revolutionary as we think, because if we're paying attention and listening to diverse sources of media, we will realize that criticizing these things is this new novel terrain that Catherine Connolly is walking on? No. If Catherine Connolly had have said this 20 years ago, then yes, now she's treading on new novel terrain. She's spearheading a movement, you could say. But when I read an article like this, and I see the way the article is painting Catherine Connolly, and again, she may actually genuinely hold these opinions as true. She may believe in them. It may be true. We have to hold out the possibility that she may be making them because the environment that we now find ourselves in November 2025, it has actually become, I would argue, popular to criticize these things. That's what I would argue. I would actually argue that you get more credibility by coming out publicly and making these kinds of statements. I think the climate is such now that this isn't actually revolutionary at all. Many people before Catherine Connolly have been saying these things. She's saying them now, which is fine. She's allowed to say them. But I think to paint her as an outlier, she's not, I would argue, an outlier. I think there are a lot of people who are saying these things. Now, maybe is the article saying she's an outlier in politics, in the political realm? Well, we have to remember, the Irish presidency is not the same as really being in government. It isn't. So perhaps it's easier when you're the Irish president to say these things, because one could make the argument that the Irish president really doesn't have that much influence. That argument could be made. In a political sense, the Irish president doesn't really have much ability to influence political policy. So is it perhaps easier as the Irish president when you know that you have no means to really influence the political policy? Perhaps you could influence people, public sentiment, that is true. Can you influence political policy? One could make the argument that the Irish president doesn't really hold that power. So an interesting question would be, if Catherine Connolly was actually in government, would she be saying these things? If she was actually at the cold face of political negotiations? Interesting question. We won't get the answer to that because she's the Irish president. She's not really what I would call in government. She's not in there with the politicians daily doing these types of political things that happen in government. So when I read this article, what is it that I really think? The first thing I think is, Catherine Connolly, is she the enormous outlier that she's being portrayed as being? I don't think it's that much of an outlier in November 2025. I think a lot of people have these opinions about these certain topics. I think a critical mass among the population has been reached, whereby these opinions are actually quite commonplace. So then, we then need to ask ourselves, Catherine Connolly, does she believe in what she's saying? She might. She might genuinely believe in what she's saying. That may be true. However, again, we want to be professionals here on Bandido Talks when we are analysing these things. And episode 8, The Art of the Porky Pie, there is a possibility. We have to at least leave this door ajar as a possibility. There is a possibility that Catherine Connolly knows. She knows that a critical mass in the population, a critical number of people within the population, are now saying these things that she's saying. She knows there are a lot of people, especially in Ireland, who, with respect to these particular topics, believe them. She knows there's a critical mass has been reached among the population. So I would speculate that Catherine Connolly is aware that these things that she is saying, that the New York Times is saying, the New York Times is essentially saying that because she has said these things, she's an outlier. I would argue, I could make the argument that Catherine Connolly is very aware that the public shares these opinions, and the public, through other political commentators too, are very aware of what is essentially happening with certain topics like this, whether it's the war in Gaza, whether it's military-industrial complexes across Europe, whether it's a united Ireland. I would make the case that it has never actually been a better time to bring up support for these topics. So we then must put our critical thinking hats on and say, okay, Catherine Connolly may believe what she's saying, and she's just saying it. Is she an outlier? We could make the argument and say she isn't, because I hear lots of other very high-profile people, politicians too, saying these things. So, is she an outlier? Also, she's the President of Ireland. She's not actually in what I would call an authentic government position, where she can influence policy. Would her opinions change if she was? Would she say things a little differently if that was her role as opposed to the Irish President role? Perhaps. But we must look at this article critically and analyse all angles and possibilities. And because we are now aware in November 2025, it is, if we're paying attention, especially in Ireland, it has never been more popular to have opinions about these things than now. It has never been more popular to have these kinds of opinions. So we need to be critical in our thinking and put ourselves in Catherine Connolly's shoes, perhaps. If we know that a critical mass within the population has been reached, a critical number of people within the population are now voicing strong opinions on these topics, would it be beneficial for me, with the upcoming presidential election, to start being quite vocal about my own opinions on these topics and my opposition to this war or to this military-industrial complex, or my prediction that a united Ireland, for example, is inevitable? Would it be in my benefit to really voice my opinion publicly on these particular topics, given that I know that a huge number of people here in Ireland share those opinions about those topics? Would that be beneficial to me in order to try and obtain this post as Irish president? We could make the argument, as I've said, that it has never been, ever, it has never been more popular than November 2025 to hold these kinds of opinions. I could easily speculate and make the argument that because the environment has never been more favourable for these opinions, we could say, whether Catherine Connolly truly believes what she's saying or not, she may. Let's say she does. I would make the argument that Catherine Connolly has never been more incentivised to publicly air her opinion on these topics, because the environment has never been more favourable for these opinions on these topics to be received by the general population. That's how I interpret this article when I see it. Do I think she's an enormous outlier? I don't think so. I think these points of view have been brought up by many other people. And I could make the argument that because the environment is so favourable now for these kinds of opinions, that perhaps we could mount a reasonable argument and say it is actually the cost-benefit analysis, when we would look at it from Catherine Connolly's point of view, the cost-benefit analysis would actually say there is far more benefit to me as a candidate for the Irish presidency to voice these opinions publicly and strongly, because there is a large number of people in Ireland who want to hear this kind of speech, we could say, from a person in a elected public position, such as the Irish presidency. So perhaps Catherine Connolly, her motivation has never been higher. Perhaps it's never been easier, actually, to make these kinds of statements in the public realm. That's what I would say about that story. Anyway, Catherine Connolly, she's been featured twice on Bandido Talks. Featured twice. So well done, Catherine Connolly. I hope you're a subscriber to the channel. I'm giving you all this PR. News on the tube last week. News on the tube this week. Catherine Connolly should be thanking the Bandido. Thanking him. Anyway, I think that is all of our stories for tonight, folks. I think that's probably a wrap. I think 3 stories is good. So, very interesting. We had the stabbings that occurred on a train in London. That was our first story. We then had the story about Emily, the 14-year-old who has essentially accomplished a marvellous physical feat of 5 ultramarathons in 5 days to raise money for her charity, or cancer charity. And then we had our final story, which is Catherine Connolly, and this article that's, I suppose, portraying her as an outlier, about having these certain opinions about certain topics. Interesting. I think very interesting stories. Anyway, let's check the chat. It's time to get into the chat and see if anybody is engaging with the show. Let's have a look. Now, I could turn to the chat here and it could be empty. There could be nobody in the chat. But if there's nobody in the chat, so be it. If there are people in the chat, great. Let's have a look and see. Now, we have, from what I can see, we have one comment in the chat. And it is from the Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman. Now, for those of you who are familiar with a certain franchise. I think it's from Disney. The Pirates of the Caribbean. For those of you who are familiar with the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, the Flying Dutchman will mean something to you. Let's see what the Flying Dutchman is commenting in our live chat tonight. So the Flying Dutchman says the following. Not what you do, but who you know. IMO, in my opinion. Okay, so let's read that out again. The Flying Dutchman says, not what you do, but who you know, in my opinion. Now, I don't know exactly. I'm almost sure that the Flying Dutchman is referring to our second story. That would be my assumption. And our second story was about Emily, the 14-year-old, running these 5 ultramarathons in 5 days. 155.3 miles, 250 kilometers. And we were talking about, on that particular story, about how there's such a gap between Emily's donation. Her fundraiser generated £2,200, so she then is going to donate £2,200 to her cancer charity of choice. And then we were contrasting that donation of £2,200 with Billie Eilish's donation that we were talking about on last night's show of $11.5 million. And I think this is what the Flying Dutchman is getting at. So we were talking about on that story, how could there be such a gap in the size of a donation? I was making the argument that neither Billie Eilish is superior to Emily, and Emily is not superior to Billie Eilish. I was making that argument. I think both things that both people do are interesting in their own way. Billie Eilish being a singer-songwriter out performing, and Emily out here in the community doing something physical, out in nature, bringing people together for a common cause. I think both have their own merit in a different way. And what was I getting at for that particular story? Well, the difference in the size of the donations. How could it be that Billie Eilish is doing something interesting in the world, but yet she makes hundreds of millions and is able to donate pocket change of $11.5 million? And then how could she be able to do that, but Emily, for doing something equally as admirable, is only able to raise, with, we could argue, the help of tens and maybe hundreds of people who have been contributing to her fundraiser? How could it be that Billie Eilish, one person, can donate $11.5 million, yet a whole collection of people, including Emily, can only raise £2,200? Bit of a gulf in the size of the donations. So I think this is what the Flying Dutchman is getting at. The Flying Dutchman is saying, not what you do, but who you know, in my opinion. Now this is interesting. Not what you do, but who you know. So this is perhaps the point that we're getting at here, folks. It's not about, and this would be maybe the point that the Flying Dutchman is making, what Billie Eilish does and what Emily has done. They're both impressive in their own way. And I'm not saying that one is superior to the other. That's my very argument, actually, that we could easily make a case that both are equally valid in their own way. So the Flying Dutchman is saying, it's not what you do, but who you know. Now that's an interesting point. How many big wealthy donors and big wealthy people does Emily know? Judging by her donation, I would argue she does not know very many of them. It would seem that based on the size of the money that she has generated, £2,200, which she is then going to donate to this cancer charity, I would argue that she does not know very many wealthy people. When I say wealthy people, I mean people who have millions and billions of pounds. What about Billie Eilish, though? Who sponsors Billie Eilish? Does she have sponsors? I'm sure she does. Let's see. Let's look this up. Let's see who are Billie Eilish's sponsors. Who are Billie Eilish's sponsors. Let's see what it says. Okay. Billie Eilish's sponsors include American Express, Nike, John Hardy, and her tour sustainability partner, Reverb, alongside partnerships with non-profits like Support and Feed. So American Express promoted her album. Nike does collaborations on her footwear and apparel. John Hardy has partnered with Eilish and her brother Phineas to create a jewellery line called JH Lovestruck. Reverb is who sponsors her tour. Okay. Needless to say, some of those sponsors who I have read out have a little bit of money in the back pocket. I think it would be fair to say that there might be a few millions, perhaps when we would combine them all together, maybe billions, who are backing Billie Eilish. We have billions, we could argue, billions of dollars backing Billie Eilish. So when the Flying Dutchman says, it's not what you do, but who you know. Does Emily know John Hardy, Nike, American Express? Are those Emily's sponsors? Judging by the £2,200 fundraising total, I would argue no, they are not her sponsors. So I think the Flying Dutchman makes a very interesting point. Is it really what you do? Is that really how the world works? Is it really, if you do something great and valuable and admirable, is that really how you get to extraordinary levels of wealth? Is it all about what you do and about how honestly you do it? Is that really how the world works? Or is it about who you know? And perhaps we could say and speculate, not just who you know, but what you are prepared to say for who you know. Maybe that's part of the deal. But that's the Bandido speculating. Pure speculation. An interesting point by the Flying Dutchman, I think. So thank you, Flying Dutchman. That's our only live chat that we have tonight. An interesting live chat. Comment. If you're, of course, watching the show after the live stream has been posted, get down into the comments section. Feel free to let me know what you thought about tonight's show. Let me know about some of the stories that we've covered. If you have any feedback or opinions on what the Bandido has had to say about these stories, put them down in the comments section. I'd love to read and see what you have to say about the show. If you liked our live stream tonight, then you can like the live stream. The little thumbs up button. If you thought that it was valuable in some way and you learned something perhaps, or had a new perspective on certain stories. And then finally, as I said in our little introduction, if you enjoy what we are generally doing here at Bandido Talks, feel free to subscribe to the channel. All subscribers, public or private, Mr. Gavin Newsom, Lord Mervyn King, perhaps Billie Eilish, who knows? Just throwing it out there. Maybe Catherine Connolly, seeing that she's made her second appearance on Bandido Talks, News on the Tube. All subscriptions, public or private, are welcome. And that is going to be a wrap for tonight, folks. That's our final live stream and episode of the week. Keep an eye out on Tuesday. We will have an upload coming on Tuesday. It's very likely to be a Best Bits upload. So keep an eye out for that on Tuesday. That Best Bits video that will be dropping. That'll be a sort of compilation of our highlights from Friday's live stream, Saturday's live stream, and Sunday's live stream, tonight's live stream. So keep an eye out for that on Tuesday. And then we'll be back live next Friday, 7 p.m, here on YouTube for our Let's Reflect episode. We'll be reflecting on our Tuesday upload. Very likely to be a Best Bits upload. So tune in on Tuesday for our Best Bits to get a summary of what we've been getting up to over Friday, Saturday and Sunday this week. And then all being well, folks, I shall get chatting with you all next Friday, 7 p.m. live here on YouTube for a little bit of reflecting on our Tuesday upload. We'll be back with more news on the tube next Saturday and Sunday. Remember, Friday, Saturday and Sunday we are live here on YouTube, always 7 p.m. A pleasure as always, folks. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening, and all being well, I will get chatting with you all next Friday here, 7 p.m. on YouTube for a Let's Reflect episode. Enjoy your evening, folks, and I will be chatting with you all next week, 7 p.m. here on YouTube.